how's it going, everyone? It's the music reviewer here, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name is Josh, and today I got another album review for you guys. And it's going to be a band called Pottery with their latest album released um, this month. The title of the album is Welcome to Bobby's Motel, and yeah, I believe Pottery's probably like the smallest band I've covered actually so far. I know last time I covered the Hines album, I made a note that they're probably the smallest band I've covered, but yeah, this definitely takes the cake. This is this Montreal's five-piece indie rock band. Its first album, and they formed somewhere around the mid 2010s. There's really not too much information out on them. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to covering this for you guys. Before I get started, just want to let everyone know I have put out the latest episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week for the week of July 4th. So if you're interested in that, check out the Best and Worst Track of the Week, the latest tracks that have come onto the latest Billboard Hot 100. And also, I have some new releases since last week. I took a little bit of a break, but if you haven't listened to it yet, check out Rolling Blackouts, Coastal Fever, Sideways to New Italy. That was an interesting album if you're interested in that. But yeah, let's get started on this Pottery album. Like I was saying earlier, Pottery is a five-piece indie rock band from Montreal, Canada. They play an experimental brand of indie rock and incorporates like many influences ranging from funk to punk. Um, and they have a very jammy nature to them. It's very simple. It's a pretty straightforward setup for them. It's just guitars, drums, and bass and keys. There's really not too many flashy production techniques or electronics thrown in into their music, and yeah, they just stick to the basics, but they're kind of doing it in a way that is kind of refreshing. I didn't actually know too much about them going into this review, other than that I've heard buzz going on about them in the past couple of years from publications and also just festival buzz. I've liked everything I heard so far, actually. I wouldn't consider myself a fan. I wasn't listening to them like every day. I probably listened to them a few times. But they were nonetheless a band I was interested in at least giving a shot. And yeah, this album actually pleasantly surprised me. Um, their sound in this album incorporates things like influences from bands like The Clash, Franz Ferdinand, Foles, but then again, it sounds different enough to where maybe those influences maybe wouldn't be as obvious to many listeners. And they kind of got me with that inanimate object name of the band that is very trendy. Um, I guess going all the way back to the 2010s, early 2010s, such as like bands like the Drums. I guess every time I see a name like that, I guess I always get suckered into checking it out. But like I said, pleasantly surprised. Also, worth noting that this album was produced by uh, Mr. Jonathan Schnick. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he has worked with bands such as Snail Mail, The Drums, Parquet Courts, and those bands are, I guess, quite familiar if you're interested in post-punk and indie rock. Those are some bigger names. Not the biggest, but some bigger names. So yeah, they're working with some, I guess, someone with a reputation, and this album definitely has does show that. I believe this album was produced in such a way that really gave the band the best shot they could to sound the best they can with what they were doing. And I'll go into this right now with just the start in the first track, the intro track, Welcome to Bobby's Motel. Immediately, this caught me as sounding similar to the band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, especially from their one of their best albums, Nonagon Infinity. If you haven't checked that album out, I highly recommend it. But the mechanical, fast-paced playing, the energetic, um, uh, you know, engine-like texture is basically what caught me. There's a nice light running guitar passages in there. It has some psych influences to it. It's an instrumental, but overall the bass sounds good. There's a fuzzy guitar solo thrown in, and yeah, biggest takeaway is that there's a lot of energy in this track, and The album just kind of holds on to that. The next track, Hot Heater, um, I like the clear production on the guitars in there, especially the bass guitar. There's some nice enthusiastic vocal performances. It has more of this rigid mechanical guitar playing that just sounds like a machine. It's just the same riff over and over. The song does have some stylistic changes. It goes into like a groovy jam with some scratchy guitars and gang vocals. The song goes into an exposed bridge part with just drums and vocals. Right there on the second track, we have already some interesting parts happening that kind of define their sound. Um, the fourth track caught my ears as well. Bobby's Forecast. This track kind of bleeds into from the previous track. It's more of a jammy uh, type track with some scratch guitar as well. They use a lot of that scratch guitar. The bass is played very funky and disco-like. It has a nice 80s Clash sound to it, the band The Clash, and I like that aesthetic. There's some melodic guitar lines that ascend, some tastefully used piano, and then right here, I'm hearing some similarities to bands like Friendly Fires as well, with the percussive utilization. There's some interesting spoken word. And so far, the album is still really holding on to that energy. The next track, Down in the Dumps, has a like dark and serious introduction. There's like a deep synth and electronic elements to it. Uh, like like I keep saying, it's really energetic and upbeat. Like the guitar work, it's a little bit wonky and unorganized, but at the same time, it fits well into the rest of the song. The drums sound great as well. There's a chaotic and frantic mood to this track. There's an ethereal sounding, uh, an ethereal sound to it, and it then bleeds into the next track, which Reflection. There's a lovely transition there. It transitions into a track that's like more light, mid-tempo, ballad-like. It's nice and textured with layers with keys and guitar, nice deep tones that are held out in the bass guitar, and there's maybe like a 70s like aesthetic to it that's groovy yet somber. And it's the most dynamic shift thus far in this track, but it's probably one of the best tracks in the album. The next track, Texas Drums Part 1 and 2, is probably one of the more interesting ones in terms of what's being done. It kind of alludes to the famous song by George Strait, All My Exes Live in Texas. Yeah, the groovy and mechanical instrumentals are reintroduced. It's very similar to early Friendly Fires material as well. Cowboy percussion is nice symbolism equating to Texas. Nice development in the first verse. It has more of like a Clash inspiration as well. There's some nice build up on the track. The track is quite long, but it develops into a part two, which has more of a washed out flavor to it. It keeps a disco beat, but everything else sounds more chaotic, nightmare like. Sonically, it sounds like an engine built to go on forever and it ends chaotically. But that was probably one of the most experimental tracks on this song, on this album. I mean, skip another track over, What's in Fashion. This one, I had some thoughts on it. It had like a harmonic, dissonant, and interesting beginning. Has similarities to the band Omni. Very colorful section in the first verse, and then it changes character in the song. It has these galloping parts that quickly turn into a chorus that's straightforward rock. Um, and it maybe the biggest gripe about the song is that it overstays its welcome at some point. What's in fashion is saying over and over again a little bit too much. It kind of loses its appeal. Um, but it's not a terrible song. It's probably one of just the lower songs on this album. Take Your Time. This one has a very technical drum performance. It's fast. You can really hear the hi-hat work. It sounds like early Foles if they were just coked out while making their album. It sounds like a machine. The band is super tight. There's like a shouted refrain in the chorus. Take your time. More bass-centric music. Weird. It has a weird and fuzzy sounding synth that just makes the track sound like it's from a different time. And That was probably like the last song on this album, second to last song on the album. That probably is worth mentioning. The ending track, it's a little bit more toned down, mid tempo. My biggest issue is that maybe it like they fully developed chorus. It was weird in the middle of the chorus how it ended, and it had like this instrumental interlude. Like I didn't know if it was done in a way that you were supposed to feel that way, but it just felt incomplete. But it has more of these quirky synth parts. But overall, I think it's not one of the stronger tracks in the album. Overall, I liked what Pottery did on this album. There's a lot of high points. I feel like I should have maybe reviewed every single song in this track, every single song of this album. Sorry. Um, and Bobby's Motel is a great debut album by this band. Uh, to me, it's very interesting to see how this band continues if they put out more music, because this is a solid debut album. I really believe that. I give it probably a light 8 out of 10. And overall, I'm just really liking the way the instruments were utilized, how consistent a lot of the composition was, and how captivating it was with a lot of the mechanical and rigid yet really entertaining performances. And also the vocal performances were really sharp too. That's one thing I forgot to mention. A lot of these tracks are great because also there's some really tasteful vocals, and it's executed really well as well. So yeah, this band has a lot of talent. It seems. I I did enjoy it. So yeah, give Bobby's Motel a listen if you're interested in some indie rock, or experimental rock. And yeah, if you made it all the way to this review, thank you. I am the music reviewer, and I'll see you guys later.